I don't know about the tree of life, but a great oak has fallen in the sparser political forest with the passing of Bill Speirs, as is evidenced by the turnout here at the funeral, the newspaper articles and obituaries that have accompanied this sad death of a man with many more years that we might have expected to have him, and the fact that in many distant parts of the world, the passing of Bill Speirs is being noticed and mourned. There are people as far away as South Africa, Palestine, indeed many parts of the Arab world, the former Yugoslavia, the former USSR. There are many whose lives Bill touched and graced and improved, who today are mourning his passing. I met Bill Speirs more than 30 years ago. I was 24 and he was 26. And I immediately felt that I had found an older, wiser, cannier, more worldly, more sophisticated brother. I deferred to him that first day and did throughout the 30 years which followed. I called him Golden Eagle. Indeed, I used to send him postcards around the world, from around the world, thus addressed. He was an eagle, a leader. He had all the views that I had, though he knew all the cases better. We shared the same attitude to the Soviet Union, the same attitude to Palestine, the same attitude within the labor movement towards the right and towards the Trotskyite left, and I apologize if there are representatives of either wing in the hall. We had the same attitude to Home Rule for Scotland at a time when it was very far from the settled will of the Scottish Labour Party. Indeed, one of the, maybe the greatest achievement of Bill Speirs was to have fought, organised, and won the argument within the Scottish Labour movement for Home Rule for Scotland, and in that, to that extent, the presence of the First Minister of Scotland and his parliamentary, and the former First Minister of Scotland and his parliamentary colleagues is a testament. It was the case back then in the 1970s that the majority in the Scottish Labour Party wanted nothing to do with Home Rule. But Bill, with his great sophistication, his spirit of inclusiveness and unity, managed to edge ever closer the Labour Party, the Labour movement in Scotland towards that great Home Rule ideal. And I think that he would probably say that the establishment of a Parliament for Scotland was the greatest achievement of his political life. But we were extremely close on the subject of Palestine, a subject on which Bill's knowledge was absolutely peerless. There was nothing that he didn't know, and therefore could face any adversary in any debate, because he knew that there was nothing they knew that he didn't, and that he could not trump as an argument. And we spent many, many wonderful days, weeks, in the Middle East with the Palestinians in the refugee camps in Beirut, and in Damascus, and in Jordan, and in the West Bank and Gaza. In fact, Bill and I were, in a sense, marooned in Gaza during the first Gulf War, when Scud missiles made in the USSR were arriving near Tel Aviv. And indeed, we were arrested together in the city of Nablus and marched off at gunpoint during those days when the Israeli army occupation force, through a curfew of which we were unaware, we found ourselves the only people in the entire street and were taken away. Our relationship over those 30 years was extremely close, and it's with the heaviest of hearts that I'm speaking here today. Once Bill phoned me and said that he'd just had a visit at the STUC from the late Andy McMahon, briefly Member of Parliament for Govan. And the conversation had gone like this: Bill, I must talk to you about your relationship with our friend from Tayside, enigmatically. I've just had a visit, he said, from a Daily Telegraph journalist, imagine. Janet Gersman, Bill. Need I say more, said Andy. She put to me that you and our friend in Tayside were the covert owners of the Lee Jeans factory in Greenock, through which you were channeling funds to assist the PLO in Scotland, and that moreover you are lovers. They were going for broke on this story. With a love nest in St. John's Wood, don't you know, in a very posh part of London. The truth was more prosaic. The address in St. John's Wood was a chemist's shop where we were gathering medical aid to go to the survivors of the massacre in Sabra and Shatila. And our frequent presence in the Lee Jeans factory was because I, as the Vice Chairman of the Labour Party in Scotland, and he, as the Deputy General Secretary of the Scottish TUC, had responsibility to support of the work-in that had been conducted there. We did, though, as I wrote last week, once share a bed in a bed and breakfast in Blackpool because we couldn't find a room anywhere with two beds. And I remember, as if it was yesterday, how we both carefully tucked our vests into our underpants, lest any impression of impropriety should spread, and how we slept that night in this tiny bed, scarcely prepared to fall asleep, lest our bodies touched, because as straight, working-class Scotsmen, that would never do. The next morning, we each thought the other had settled the bill. Had a breakfast, a hearty breakfast, and swanned off to the Labour conference. And only weeks later, we were bearded by a very important man, the late and great Right Honourable John Smith, QC MP, who nervously coughed and said, "Lads, I wanted to see you about this bill for a bed and breakfast, a double room in a bed and breakfast in Blackpool." The owner had enlisted his own Queen's Counsel to recover the money, which we stumped up, of course, not wishing this story ever to be mentioned in public in front of television cameras and journalists. I agreed with Bill Speirs on absolutely everything all my life. And it's a very, very great loss that he's no longer with us. There was only one thing on which I found him to be unsound, and that was football. As you said, he claimed to be a St. Mirren supporter. But many of us suspected that that was a kind of mask for something else. And once at Hampden Park, in a Scottish Cup final, may even have been a replay, Bill and I were in the middle of the stadium when Rangers scored undeservedly. And the Rangers' end, in the cold night air, erupted, and a sort of steam emerged from the enclosed part, because the Rangers' end was enclosed. Our part was not. Make of that as you will. And as this steam emerged from the Rangers' end, I said to Bill, look at that seething mass of orange reaction. And Bill answered, and don't you forget it. I will never, ever, ever forget Bill Speirs and what he meant in my life. And I suspect I'm not alone in that. Thank you very much.